Hello, everyone, and welcome to this introductory e-reporting webinar. My name is Laia Grino, and in my role as Director of Data Discovery, I help manage our e-reporting program. Also with me today is Katie Nyheisel, our e-reporting liaison, whom many of you already know at least via email. Before I get started, I just want to note that we are recording today's presentation and we'll be sending you the link in a follow-up email. We can also share the presentation if you reach out to us at our eGrants@candid.org email. So our goal for today is to cover the basics of e-reporting, including why you should participate in this program, what data we're asking for, how you should submit it, and what happens next. I'll end by going over some things you can do after this webinar, whether you're already e-reporting or will be sharing data with us for the first time. So what is e-reporting? E-reporting is simply sharing your grants data with Candid, usually in an Excel format. And a wide variety of organizations in terms of the size, type, and focus areas share their grants data with Candid. While the vast majority of e-reporters are US-based, as you can see on this chart, funders from all over the world do share their data with us, either directly or via our partners. You can find a complete list of current e-reporters on our data sharing partners page, and a link to this and other resources are included at the end of this presentation. So I will begin by just walking you through why you should share your grants data with Candid. First, e-reporting allows you to take control of your story. And by this, we mean being able to more accurately represent your grant making, including what it's meant to accomplish and who it's meant to serve. Without your input, the only source of information on your grant making is likely to be your 990, a document that your organization likely prepares with compliance rather than communications in mind. And you should be aware that whether you participate in e-reporting or not, Candid and others will have access to your 990 data. And this is problematic for two reasons. And in fact, the e-reporting program was specifically created to address the shortcomings of 990 data. The first of these shortcomings is the quality of the grants data in the 990. In the worst cases, 990 sometimes have no grant descriptions or just one-word grant descriptions, and sometimes those are the same for all the grants in a grants list. But even when more detail is provided, it can be really difficult, if not impossible, to determine what the grant is really about, what it's trying to accomplish, who it's meant to benefit, or which communities will be served. And so Candid's e-reporting program was created to allow you to share more details about your grants so you can communicate better about this important aspect of your organization's work and leave less to interpretation and therefore reduce the need for people to fill in the gaps. Candid also gives you a way to share the story with key audiences by providing you with a complimentary map of your grants data, the data that you share via e-reporting. That map has a few views, including the distribution of your grants by the location of the recipient, as well as the geographic area served. And you can use this map internally with colleagues or board members, or externally by posting it on your website. And if you're currently participating in e-reporting and haven't gotten a link to your complimentary map, please reach out to us and let us know so we can send that to you. The second problem with 990 data is that it's usually outdated. In recent years, there's been even longer than usual delays in getting 990 data from the IRS due to government shutdowns and limited capacity at the agency. And I've just included these two tables to give you a sense of just how much of a lag there can be in getting 990 data. So as of this week, Candid had only received about 1,000 fiscal year 2020 returns. And you can imagine if we'd only had access to 990 data, we would have been able to say very little about what funders were doing in response to the many significant events of last year, to put it mildly, from record-shattering wildfires to the worldwide COVID pandemic or the fight for racial equity, not to mention the census or election. I also want to point out that even for fiscal year 2019, we've received relatively little data. As of now, for 990 PFs, we have less than 25% of returns, which brings me to the second reason why it's important to share your grants data. It's good for the sector. The current better quality data that you share with Candid via e-reporting provides the field with a baseline of information it can use to address the challenges and opportunities of today. And that data can help grant seekers have a better understanding of your current priorities and provides other funders with at least some intelligence about who else is addressing the issues they care about or who are active in their community. I also want to point out that sharing your data with Candid can also save you time. Candid serves as a central repository of information for the field and others interested in the work of the philanthropic sector. And so the investment of time you put upfront into e-reporting can save you time down the road. You just need to share your data once using our Excel-based e-reporting format, and then we structure, clean, and code the data so it can be deployed for multiple resources and serve the needs of multiple audiences. So those resources include Foundation Directory Online, our prospect research tool, which though it is a subscription product, I should note it's available for free at more than 400 FIN partner locations, and FIN stands for Funding Information Network. It's also available in Foundation Maps, Candid's premier data visualization tool, which is aimed at making it easy to see who's funding what and where around the world. If relevant, your data may also inform one or more of our foundation landscapes, and these are customized issue or location-specific websites that bring together our data visualization tools, research, and other resources that Candid has to illuminate critical issues in philanthropy. There's many more landscapes than what I've highlighted here. There's, in addition to these, for example, there's landscapes on investing in Native communities, advancing human rights, etc. And these landscapes are all publicly available. Data is also used in research reports, whether those are produced by Candid or other actors in the sector. For example, Philanthropy Massachusetts used Candid data to produce Giving Massachusetts 2020, the first report on institutional philanthropy in Massachusetts in over 15 years. E-reported data and other data, including 990 information, also powers the dashboards we've developed in collaboration with some of the regional funder associations that participate in our Get on the Map campaign. And these dashboards are meant to provide an at-a-glance overview of institutional philanthropic information for particular states or regions. And the more recent data we have via e-reporting, the more up-to-date and relevant the information on these dashboards can be. And again, these are all public, so available to anyone to learn about the work of the sector. Finally, and I think particularly relevant for this conversation, your data would also show up in what we call special issue pages, sites that Candid started creating last year to provide the social sector with the resources they need to make informed decisions about today's most pressing issues. To date, we've created sites focused on the COVID pandemic and racial equity. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all the funders who shared their COVID data last year and who continue to do so. It's really made a difference to our ability to be able to communicate what the sector is doing in response to this unprecedented pandemic. I want to wrap up this part of the webinar on the why with one final thought on why it's important to share good current data. Having data funders and nonprofits are doing now allows us to demonstrate the relevance of the sectors and its contributions to society, not just in terms of addressing the challenges, but also in helping communities flourish. And these are all examples of articles that have cited Candid data. So there's individual benefits to sharing information, as I've mentioned, but there's also sector-wide benefits that I think are just as important to keep in mind. Okay, so we've covered the what and why of e-reporting, so let's turn to the nuts and bolts, starting with what data about your grants you should share. And our e-reporting template includes many fields, which we break down into several groups. So I'll start with our 10 required fields, which is what we consider the basic, since most of these are fields you'd include in your 990s grants list anyway. So as you can see here, about half of these fields are about the recipient of your funding and their location. Then you have a few fields related to the amount of funding provided, and we include currency because, as you saw at the beginning of this presentation, we do have funders from outside the United States who contribute their grants data. And then we also ask that you specify the fiscal year the grants were awarded or paid. And finally, to provide a grant description. Next, we have highly recommended fields, and I've broken those down into two groups. In this first set that you see here are fields that are relevant for coding. So providing data for these fields allows Candid to more accurately code your grants with our taxonomy, the philanthropy classification system, or what we call the PCS. So Candid tries to code grants for the 5 facets that you see marked with an asterisk there. So grant subject, population served, support strategy, which are things like program support, capacity building, advocacy, etc., and transaction type, whether it's a cash grant or a program-related investment, for example. And when you share data on these fields with Candid, you can either use your own coding or you can use the PCS. The final field here, fund type, is one that we particularly recommend for community foundations so that we and others who use Candid data can identify which are donor advised versus discretionary grants. The second group of highly recommended fields include data points that allow us to accurately process or update your data. So that includes a unique transaction or grant ID, and that's especially important to have for us if later you want to make some updates to the information you've sent. Maybe there's a correction you need us to make, and having that as a reference is really helpful. We also ask for or recommend providing an identifier for the recipient of the grant, such as an EIN. We ask, again, because we're getting grants data from both US-based and non-US based funders, that you give us the actual ID and then tell us what type of ID that actually is. We also encouraged funders to provide information on the grant duration in months so that we can identify multi-year grants. As you all well know, there's a great deal of interest in the extent to which funders are providing multi-year funding. Finally, we have a set of other fields that are useful to provide for some of the same reasons I mentioned above, but that are less critical than those others. And the last one here, Candid Project, that's where you can flag that a grant should appear in a particular Candid resource, such as our Advancing Human Rights Landscape. So some funders begin participating in our e-reporting program because they want their grants data to be reflected in some of these resources that Candid makes available to the field, and this is one way you can ensure that those grants actually do appear there. All right, so once you've decided what data to share, how should you submit it? So in our e-reporting template, you'll find easy instructions as well as links to resources. And basically the first step is to get your data into an Excel spreadsheet. If you use one of our partners grants management software, you'll either find an export report built into their systems or be able to get their assistance in creating one. And in the template, you'll find a link to our software partners page where you can see who's actually partnering with us on e-reporting. I do want to note that the report will most likely still be listed as a Foundation Center or eGrant report rather than a Candid report. So just in case that want to avoid creating confusion for folks on that front. So you can export your most recent grants data using that software's export function, or you can input your grants data into our template. And then once you have your data ready, you can either submit the grants data through Updater, which is a free tool, or email it to egrants@candid.org. And the benefit of using Updater is that allows you to review and update the information that Candid has about your organization, such as mission, program, staff, etc. Just one final thing about the template. The file does include two versions of the template. There's a complete version that has all the fields, and a simplified one that we created more recently, which includes only the required fields and highly recommended fields that are most frequently shared by e-reporters. And we created that to make it easier for organizations to begin participating in e-reporting, but please keep in mind that aside from the required fields, you have wide latitude to determine what data you share about your grants. And like I said at the beginning, once you get your map, once you share your data, within 2 to 3 weeks, you'll receive your free grants map that you can use however you'd like. And here's just a quick shot of the template. The required fields are marked with an asterisk, and we've provided definitions for each field right under the heading. And then the fields you see highlighted in gold are those highly recommended fields that I walked through. And then here is just an example of the data submitted by an e-reporter recently, and you can see that rather than use our template, they've just exported the data from their grants management software system. Okay, so you decided what to share, you prepped it and submitted it. What happens then? I just wanted to highlight two important processes that the data that you submit to Candid goes through. The first of which is matching. When you send in your list of grants, one of the first things that happens is that we try to match your grantees to the correct recipient in Candid's database. And we have hundreds of thousands of recipients in our database, which is why it's so important to include as much information about the recipient as possible. Ideally, an identifier like the EIN that makes things very unambiguous. But if not, at a minimum, the city and state, or city and country if the recipient is located outside the United States. And obviously we're mapping this information, which is another important reason why it's good to share location information. One other thing is it's good to avoid acronyms, since those can be common across many organizations. And here I've just mocked up an example of how 4 different funders might have reported on a grant to Alight, formerly known as the American Rescue Committee. So, you know, that information would go to our database, and then our database would look at the information provided like name, EIN, and location to try to determine the best match. The second other important process your grants go through is coding. And most grants are auto-coded by our machine learning algorithm. A subset of grants are manually coded by Candid staff, and that's usually the grants from the largest funders in the US, but also some of our what we call special project grants are coded by staff as well. In a few cases, funders include coding in the data they send us, sometimes even using our taxonomy, the PCS. And finally, in certain circumstances, grants might also receive the coding we have for the organization receiving the funding. And that happens when we just don't have enough text from the grant itself to code the grant, or in the case of general support grants, which are intended to support the recipient's mission. Because the majority of our grants are auto-classified, I just want to take a minute to explain how that works. So our autocoder looks at 3 fields. It looks at the grant description, and if it's available, because it's been provided via e-reporting, it will also look at the grant title and program area. And then based on that information, the autocoder attempts to assign the grant codes for those 5 facets. If it can't assign it, if it's not confident about a prediction, it will just leave that coding blank. Usually, like I said, only a grant description is available. So that's why that particular field is so important. So what makes for a good grant description? We say that a good grant description covers the what. So what's the primary objective of the grant? The who's specifically meant to benefit from the grant? The how will the objectives of the grant be achieved? And the where. So what geographic areas is the grant meant to serve, since that's often different than where the recipient of the funding is located. And I want to emphasize that a good grant description really doesn't have to be long. It can be as short as one sentence. And here's a couple of examples of concise grant descriptions and the coding they received. So here you have the purchase of ophthalmic equipment to expand capacity to provide free vision exams at clinics. So the reference to equipment allows us to apply a support strategy code of equipment, maybe capacity building and technical assistance is stretching it a bit. And free vision exams allow us to code it by subject and population served. And then here's another example where references to elder abuse and curriculum and medical residents allow us to assign subject, population, and support. And both of these grants were entirely coded by our auto classifier. A couple of other tips. So we ask that you please only submit data where you have one grant per row. And again, to not forget to send data on all the required fields, and that includes the recipient location, the amount type, whether it's paid or authorized or approved, and the fiscal year, which is really important. That's how Candid loads data. So this is the final section before I turn to your questions. So now that you have this information about e-reporting, what can you do? So first, I'd just start by taking stock of the data you collect about your grants and then compare it to the fields in our e-reporting template. And from that, decide what you can share. And if you're already e-reporting, maybe you can undergo this exercise to identify what additional fields you might be able to share. I'd prioritize sending more detailed grant descriptions. So that's where I would focus my efforts if I was looking to improve the data I shared with Candid. And that's not just because it can lead to better coding, but if you've used our tools or like other tools, most people rely on keyword searches to find what's relevant to them. So it's good to have good text to go by. As you're likely aware, we're asking that you share data on your fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 grants to date by June 30th. Though please get in touch if you need more time. And then finally, we just recommend setting a reminder to e-report regularly. The minimum is annually, but you can share your data quarterly, periodically after board meetings as grants are approved, monthly. The cadence is up to you. I will say that if you share fiscal year 2021 data by June, don't forget to send the rest of your FY21 data throughout the year. And you can always email us at egrants@candid.org with any questions or comments you might have. So I know we've covered a lot, so I just wanted to end with 3 final thoughts before turning to you for questions. First, I hope you recognize that your data is an asset, just as your funding is. And so sharing your data benefits your organization and the sector as a whole. Second, while the e-reporting template has a lot of fields, only 10 fields are required to e-report, and it's perfectly fine to start with just those 10 fields. And that's what's important, to just get started. And finally, we're here to help. So if you have any questions about anything, please reach out to us again at egrants@candid.org. Several people at Candid check that inbox multiple times a day, so you will get a quick response. And I'll just highlight here the resources that I've included at the end of this presentation, which includes, basics about e-reporting, our software partners, the foundation landscapes, and that page also has a link to the dashboards. that I mentioned, and then our data sharing partners. And so with that, I'm going to turn to questions.
Hi, Laia, it's Katie. So our first question is, can you enter unlimited number of program areas, for example? And I suspect by example, meaning like subject or pop or geo. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer that?
Go ahead.
So yes, you can enter multiple program areas. You can enter multiple subjects, population, geo area. The best way to do that is to, for multiple entries, is to separate those individual entries with a semicolon. And within that, for example, if you're sending something like geography, you would say like San Francisco County, comma, California, then semicolon, then if it was also Los Angeles County, again, comma, California, and then another semicolon if something followed that. Otherwise, for our coding, for terms, for subject or pop or strategy, you would use either the code or the term, not both, and those would also be separated by a semicolon. Laia, yes?
Sorry, I just wanted to mention that in the template, you'll find in one of the tabs, there's examples of how you can provide the data, and it does have guidance on how to submit, multiple codes for a grant.
Okay, and Laia, this question you might be able to answer better than I. For the Donors of Color Network project, is the taxonomy the same that we would use for coding our POC leadership?
Yeah, I think, and I see that the second part of that question is, if you reported on these grants already, how do you update the data?
Yes.
So if you've already submitted data before, just get in touch with us after this webinar. And like I said, it helps if we already have grant IDs for those grants, so we can more easily update it. But if not, we can send you the grants data and you can make updates there, and then we can update the information. And we'll follow up on the particular coding questions for this project separately, Mary.
Okay, and then also, how should we report the recipient when funds are given to an intermediary, but the project is more for a grassroots recipient, artist, or budding changemaker? So the best way to do this is in the name field of the template is to use the name of the fiscal sponsor, and then use their EIN and address information, and then to use the, you could put the organization, the actual grassroots recipient, artist, or other in the grant title or within the grant description would probably be the best way to go in that sense. What do you think, Laia?
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay, and let me just see what else we have here.
So we have a question from Connor about whether, if you're an operating foundation, should you submit data about non-grant project expenditures? And if so, are there any process differences for that?
Could you repeat that, please?
If you're an operating foundation, should you submit data about non-grant project expenditures?
Non-grant, I'm not quite sure about that question, Laia. Could you?
Yeah,
non-grant.
So if you're an operating foundation, you're probably running your own programs. We do have one of our support strategy codes is foundation administered programs. And so I think that's the best way for operating foundations to be able to report on their grants. But this is an area, it's more unusual for operating foundations to participate in e-reporting. So Connor, that's also something that maybe we can explore one-on-one after this webinar. And if there's other operating foundations on the call, feel free to reach out and we can address those questions. If we see a mistake on the map, what is the best way to submit a correction? Katie, do you want to take that one?
I would say if you see a mistake on the map, if it's just one or two or something that you can perhaps screenshot to me from the map, I may be able to correct it quickly in that way. But otherwise, depending on it's something I would say contact me and tell me the details at the time, because it depends on the situation. If there's something about like the data loaded incorrectly, we might just want to take it out and reload it. So it depends on how simple it is. Like if it's just a matter of going into the database, doing a little tweak here or an edit, then that could be a really quick fix. So I would just say, just email me at egrants@candid.org and tell me what the issue is, and I may be able to just do it in that moment. When I do an edit, though, sometimes it does take a day or two to show up. We have a data transfer that it may need to go through before you can actually see it. But if it's simple, I can pretty much do that on the spot.
The next question is from Ashley, who's just asking for a clarification on what fiscal year we're asking for. And Ashley, yes, when we say provide the fiscal year, it is the fiscal year of you as the funder, not the recipient. The next question, and Katie, maybe you can take this one, is how to report on multi-year grants. Erin is saying, I heard one row per grant, but I also know a funder who wants to see their funding represented in the year amount it is paid rather than the year amount that was committed.
Well, you can send grants lists for a list of grants paid in a fiscal year or a list of grants authorized in a fiscal year. So if you're sending paid, it would be similar to what you're sending on the 990, and so each year you would send that amount that was paid for a multi-year grant. Otherwise, in an authorized list, we would want the full amount of the grant that was authorized, and then you can use the duration field to note the duration in months of how long that grant is. We also have a column that is a begin date, and then another for the end date. So that is the way to do it if you were sending a list of new grants authorized within a fiscal year. And when we talk about fiscal year, I see fiscal year of the funder, not the recipient, right? Yes, when we want the fiscal year, we want your fiscal year, the fiscal year in which you paid these grants, the fiscal year in which the fiscal year in which these grants were newly authorized. And one more note on fiscal year. Fiscal year could be calendar year, but it could also be off calendar. So if in Candid database, if your calendar year is from say July 2020 to June 2021, we would call that fiscal year 2021.
Yes, it's based on the end date of the fiscal year. So the next question is from Havika, and this is a very common question that we get. So she's noting, my board is concerned about sharing too much data too widely. We're a staff of one and we're not able to process a huge amount of contacts or requests. Does sharing this data open us up to getting a lot of people contacting the organization to pursue funding? So just a couple of responses to that. The first is that even if you don't share it, Candid will still have access to your grants information via the 990. What eReporting does is it allows you to share better data about your grant making priorities because it allows you to provide more details about those grants. So I think that in combination with ensuring that your profile in Candid's database is up to date regarding, what your priorities are, what the giving limitations might be, those two things together can help ensure that the requests that you get are more appropriate to your organization. But again, the data about your grant making is available to Candid and others, whether you personally share it or not. And the next question is from Ashley asking, can you give a little bit more detail on what PCS coding is? And Ashley, thank you. I meant to mention this during the webinar. So we'll be having a follow-up sort of eReporting 201 webinar in either late May or early June. We're still finalizing the timing, focused specifically on coding and the taxonomy. But just briefly here, the PCS, the Philanthropy Classification System, is a taxonomy built off of the originally developed from the NTEE. So, we found that the NTEE as a taxonomy was too limited for classifying the organizations in the social sector and their work. And so, particularly when it came to classifying things by population served. And so the PCS is an expansion of what you can find in the NTEE, and it's evolved over time and will continue to evolve over time as the sector and what it focuses on changes. And Katie, maybe you could drop what you said in the chat. If you want to learn more about our taxonomy, you can go to taxonomy.candid.org. Okay, so the next question is from Aaron, asking, does Candid ever overwrite coding provided by the funder? And I think this is most applicable if you use our philanthropy classification system. This is a possibility, although we always take into account the coding that a funder has provided. In some cases, though, a funder might not be familiar with all of the terms in our taxonomy. There are hundreds and hundreds of terms in the PCS. And so, our expert indexing team might be aware of a code that's more specific to describe the word of that grant. And so it might get overwritten in that instance, for example. And this would be true if there was, grants being reviewed either for our research set or for another special project. I'll also say what might be more common is that our indexers might apply additional codes to the grant based on the information provided. The next question is, if a funder doesn't provide all their grants through eReporting, do you find all the non-reported grants on the 990 and add them to your database in the future?
I can answer that. No, we do not. There is a reason why we might go to search all of the grants on the 990, but we have an annual research set, and if it's a funder that we need to have for that annual research set, we would go to the 990, but that would essentially replace what was provided by the funder for that report. What would show up on your eReporting map, which is complimentary when you eReport, you get your data as submitted through eReporting. So that map would only show the partial data that you submitted through eReporting. It would not show your complete data for that year. So we would only do that in an instance where we needed that data for a special project or report.
There's also a question about whether the slides will be shared with live hyperlinks. That is my goal. If for any reason it's not included in the follow-up email you get to this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us at egrants@candid.org and we'll send you the copy. But yes, I'm aiming to include a link to the presentation in addition to a link to the webinar recording. So Katie, I think this next question might be good for you to answer. So right. If a grant is approved for multiple years, do you only want, so grant is approved for multiple years going from FY20 to FY22. Do you only want the FY20 and 21 information because that's what our request was, or only grants that have been paid, not scheduled out?
Well, again, I would say if you're sending a list of paid grants, then you only want to send what was paid in those fiscal years. And as we're right now, we're asking for 2020 and 2021 to date. If it was actually paid within that time frame, then I would send in only those. If it's approved, then again, you would just send in the list of approved. You would send in the complete amount, and then use the months, the duration in months, and then those begin end dates. And you might use that end date to say specifically what that time frame is. But of course, just using the duration in months is fine as well. We don't want a paid amount to be sent for a year that hasn't happened yet, I guess is the best way to say that. So if you're sending paid, we would want the 2020 and the 2021 if those have happened, but not anything that's scheduled to be paid. I think that's the best way to answer it. I hope that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Katie. The next question is from Aaron. To confirm, can we send all of our 2020 grants data in one submission by June 30th? In other words, is 6 months after the close of a fiscal year okay for e-reporting? But there's multiple questions here, so let's start with those. Yes, you can send all of your 2020 data by that deadline. That's completely fine. For the last several years, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a June 30th deadline. That is what we're aiming to do every year, because we feel that that's a reasonable time frame for most funders to be able to send in their data given differences in fiscal years. And then the second question is, if we send data that is duplicate, is Candid catching the dupes, or is it critical for us not to report any overlaps? So COVID data requested separately would be an example.
I would say, well, I would say that we prefer that you do not send data previously sent, but we are aware that this happened, especially in a situation like COVID. So if you are sending a complete list, I am checking to see that we received, whether or not we received COVID data directly from you previously, and we are doing our best to deduplicate those. It's kind of, it's a manual process to an extent, so it does take a little longer if you're waiting for your data to show online, but we are doing that. But if at all possible, if you could send the data without data previously sent, that would be ideal, and just let us know whether this is a complete list or whether you are not including that previously sent data.
We have a question from Andrea. When it comes to e-reporting on grants to individuals, if the grant itself is not specifically geared towards a specific racial ethnic group, do we still report on that individual's racial ethnic identification? Katie, I have some thoughts, but if you have a response, feel free to jump in.
I don't know that I have an accurate response on that, because I think this is something that we've probably not really talked about as much, which we should. But I guess it's if it pertains to what the grant is about. But Laya, what do you say on that subject?
So just one word about grants to individuals, and actually sensitive information in general. It could be a donor name or an individual recipient's name. We don't identify individual recipients of grants in our products, and we ask that you not send us that data, since it could be considered sensitive information. So we recommend that you anonymize grants to individuals. It could be anonymous individual. And then, of course, you should take care not to provide any information like an address that could allow someone to identify the individual recipient of that grant. Again, if it's like an individual person versus an organization. And so that's the only thing I could think of as well, is that if identifying the person's race or ethnicity might allow someone to identify that particular person as the recipient of that grant, then I would probably not include that in the file either. So I would just think about the privacy and security concerns there. Also, as some laws, like in California and in Europe, are you know, putting more boundaries on what can be shared about people. The next question is from Shirley. I think the question is, what data do you get from this e-reporting that you don't get from the 990? So in the 990, basically the information that's available to us are those 10 basic required fields that I shared at the beginning, so, or in the middle of this presentation. So the recipient and its location, a grant description, and the amount, and that's basically it. In the e-reporting template, given also that this is prepared, more likely to be prepared with an eye to communicating about the grant making of your organization, the effort put into the grant description might be different than what goes into your 990. So not operations or just program support, but an actual description of what those things are. And then, as you saw with the highly recommended fields, you could actually provide information on the subject, population served, geographic area served, etc. You can also identify grants as donor advised or discretionary if you're a community foundation, which might make a huge difference in how an external audience interprets your grant making. So I think just in terms of what you're able to provide information on, it's much more extensive in the e-reporting template than it is in a 990. And the last question is from Carly. My organization started grant making in 2019. Can we send all grants to date? And Katie, do you want to take that one?
Yes, that would be fine. We would love to have 2019. We are right now focused on collecting 2020 and 2021 to date, as noted. But our campaign for 2019 data was stalled last year due to other concerns, as you all know. So if you would like to send your 2019, please do. And anyone can ask me specific questions about their data by contacting me at egrants@candid.org to ask, where, what was the last year that your organization submitted data if you are not sure of where you are right now.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. I just want to thank everyone for joining. As I said, this webinar was recorded, and you will be receiving a link to the recording, and hopefully you'll also see a link to the slides so you have access to all the resources mentioned. But if not, as I said, and Katie, you can always reach out to us at egrants.candid.org. Thanks very much, and stay tuned for our next webinar.